On behalf of the National Career Development Association, welcome to the NCDA webinar series. Thank you all for being here for this session titled Collaborative Negotiation Theory Applied to Career Counseling and Coaching. So let's go ahead and get started. Justin Wright and Tad Meyer are the authors of Finding a Job That Loves You Back, which proposes a framework for collaborative negotiation for networking and informational interviews. Today, we'll learn more about working with students and clients to identify their interests, find connectors, engage with employers and other decision makers, and find fulfillment. So welcome, Justin and Tad. I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're going to introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about the session in a minute, but we wanted to give you all a chance just to arrive and say hi to each other. Since this is a chance for connection and we want this to be interactive, so we figured we'd start with you all having a chance to connect. So we're going to put you in groups of two, and we're going to ask you just to share your name, organization, where you're calling in from, and what's a piece of advice that you most wish the people you coached would actually follow. So if you think about advice that you give people that then they don't follow, what is a piece of advice that you wish people would follow that you give? All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. Tad and I are really excited to have the chance to share some of our work with you all today from the book that we recently wrote that's called How to Find a Job That Loves You Back. And the advice we were, in prepping the workshop, we were asking what advice do we wish people followed? And Tad may have shared this with his group. But one of the things we often hear and say in our coaching is, you can either ask for help or you can do it alone. And you can't do it alone. And so, but a lot of people try to do it alone in career development. And so what we want to focus on today in this workshop is a frame for career development and career coaching that sees every step of it as a collaborative negotiation. And so why Tad and I came to this will make a little more sense when you know a little more about us. So I think we'll tell a little bit about who we are and our bios and how we came to this. And then we'll talk specific purposes for today, what we need from you, and then we'll get started. So Tad, I don't know, do you want to give a quick who you are and how you ended up writing this book with me and Carly? And then I'll do the same and we'll dive into purposes.
Didn't hear you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, my name's Tad Meyer. Off to a great start. I'm a partner at Essex Partners, which is an outplacement firm working primarily with senior leaders. But in my 10-year career as a career coach, I've worked with people at all levels and all roles, all industries. Luckily, I still get to do some of that, so it keeps my hand in that. And I do this because I've been through a major job search and I didn't know what the process was. So being able to share the process with people so that they can actually do the process instead of trying to figure out what it is incredibly rewarding for me. So I love it. I just love it.
And Tad and I met, I don't know, almost 15 years ago in the negotiation and collaborative negotiation mediation space. So we were both doing work around teaching people how to be collaborative negotiators, how to do conflict management. And it turns out that there are all these skills we were learning in that industry that ended up being hugely helpful for actually getting jobs ourselves. And so we sat down with our colleague Carly and thought, wow, most people, like if you're working at a company that makes, windmill turbines, you're not, what you learn day to day doesn't help you get a job, right? Like the mechanics of windmills, like that doesn't help you get a job. But for us, learning how to do collaborative negotiation, which is what we were teaching day to day, actually turned out to be very helpful in developing our own careers. And so we thought this would be a nice thing for us to share, which is what inspired us all to write the book. I've gone on since then. I work at a company I founded that teaches negotiation, teaches how to run effective meetings, teaches people how to have difficult conversations. And I also coach and train in this space around career development with this specific focus on collaborative negotiation. So what we want to do today is share a high level, what does this mean? Like, okay, so you're negotiating all the time in jobs. How does that actually translate into your work as a career coach? How do you think about the model? And then we want us to talk specifically about the context of an informational interview for thinking about collaborative negotiation. Because when you're thinking about a job, when I'm actually in an interview for a job and then I get an offer letter, like that's an obvious place to negotiate. But what about in an informational interview? a little less obvious. So we wanted to focus on that today as our main sort of topic area. I'm going to be emceeing, and Tad is going to be jumping in, watching the chat, adding questions, adding insights. So we'll be handing back and forth fairly fluidly throughout the conversation. And we want this to really be a conversation. We appreciate how many of you are on camera. And if you have questions, we want you to just interrupt us. Come off mute, raise your hand with the little reactions. Does everyone know how to do that? Can you show me that you know how to do the little hand raise thing? It's under reactions at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Yes. Awesome. Or clapping. That's fine too. Thumbs up. Great. Okay. Wonderful. So please, if you have questions, put your hands up or just come off mute. But we really want this to be a conversation. And we have a plan for what we want to talk about. And if there's something you want to know about that we're not talking about, we're here to serve you. So feel free to take us off in another direction, and Tad and I will decide real time if we can afford the detour. Okay, that's that. Thanks for having cameras on for those of you who can. Fine if you can't. The last thing is we're assuming that you're a sophisticated audience. So we're going to move quickly through some things that we would move slowly through for people who aren't around career coaching all the time. If we are going too fast, please, no shame in just saying, hey, Ted, Justin, wait, what does that mean? You're using a term I'm not familiar with. And if we're going too slow, feel free to say, yeah, we all know this. We're falling asleep. Please move on to the key points. Okay. So with that, let's dive in. Tad,
Can I check in?
Please,
Let
Tad.
me just check in. Kelly, I saw you actually raise your hand physically, and I see your raised hand is still on. I just want to make sure do you have a question?
Just hasn't come down.
Great.
Sorry.
Just making sure. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Nope, you're fine. Sorry about that.
So with just a quick show of physical, you don't have to do the virtual hands. How many of you actively career coach as like part of your day job? Okay, most of you. And Ivan and Lauren, can I ask you all quickly, just quickly tell us about your roles and what's most useful for you?
I work for the Department of Labor.
Oh,
and
lovely. Welcome.
and I work in the area that supports career services and the American Job Centers, and I also teach adjunct career planning. So I didn't get a chance to raise my hand, but yeah, so I do some career coaching.
Okay, lovely, wonderful. Ivan, what about you?
So my current day job is a social worker in a hospital.
Oh, wow.
So in terms of anything kind of related to career coaching is more like sometimes for some parents, maybe they need to do some change for their career while because of the illness of their child. And then also there may be some newcomer families or refugee families and kind of like got involved because they all have financial and housing issues that also related to their employment and the difficulty in finding employment as well. And also I on and off I've been mentoring some other like social work students or some other newcomer social workers as well. So sometimes I will maybe offer some like practice interviews or just
So you're really doing a lot of
yeah.
this.
Yeah, just yeah.
Our co-author on the book, Carly, is also a social worker and also does quite a bit of this in their private practice because sometimes what's given people trouble is work. So that's great. All right. And thank you, Elizabeth, for naming the community college counseling in the chat. So Tad and I want to give a quick overview of the concept that we're working from and then talk specifically about the conversations with what we will call connectors, but that means informational interviews. So for us, we see there being 3 conversations that you're having as you advance through your career over and over again. And the first conversation is with yourself. And it's a conversation to get clarity about what you want, what your goals are. The second conversation is then with connectors. So connectors are people who cannot give you a job, but they can give you everything else you need. They can give you information. They can give you access to other people. They can give you access to learning opportunities, They can just help you understand the lay of the land. They can help you get clear. It's basically anyone who might help you who's not a decision maker on a hiring manager or a decision maker, someone in HR. So that's a connector. That's the second conversation you need to be having consistently throughout your career development. And then the last is the obvious one, which is the negotiation, the conversation you're having with decision makers. So these are the people who are saying, Lauren, I'd really like to hire you for this position. I know you have this great job, but why don't you come work with us, right? That's a decision maker because they want to work with you, you want to work with them, and you're trying to figure out if it's a good fit. So each of those conversations involves some negotiating. It involves some give and take, some figuring out what you really care about. And so we have the model we've talked about is how do you figure out what matters most and then have those tough conversations first with yourself about what you care about, then with connectors to get the access capital is what we call it, but the access you need. Because at the end of the conversation with connectors, you should have a situation where when you apply for jobs, they say, Linda, you are an excellent fit for this. We want to figure out how to work with you, not why are you applying for this job? Right. And so the conversation with connectors should be the one that gets you to that place where then you're really qualified. So those are the three conversations. Tad, anything to add on that before we go a little deeper on the connectors piece?
Just to go a little, connectors, I just want to go off a little bit on connectors,
please.
Because connectors are incredibly important throughout your career. Because what most people, I know with most of the clients I work with, I mentioned networking, which is where connectors fit in. And they're like either, oh, it doesn't work, or I hate that, or something along those lines. And what people usually think of with connectors is, or with networking is, I need to find someone who can get me a job. They think of, they skip all the other layers. Like the first layer is brainstorming with somebody. You know what you have some idea of what's important to you, sharing that with someone and seeing what ideas pop for them. Then you may do informational interviews, as Justin mentioned, to try to find out more about a company, an industry, a role. Then you may ask them for connections so that you can get that role, get to that decision maker. But then after that, when you're in the role, you still work with your connectors to get better at your job. Like you're given a new assignment, you don't have 100% surety about it. You call one of your connectors, say, hey, I know you do this. Can you give me some advice?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe you collaborate with them on something, which is another level. And then eventually you may get to the point where you're working with them on how to change from job fulfillment to career fulfillment. And you're working with them on the clarity you need for that and what you might do to shift your career in a way that you're going to feel fulfilled by the end of it. So I just want to say connectors are a really rich area. So if you have any questions,
gets ignored. Yeah. So let's talk now. That's where we really want to focus our time, is on the connectors. Let's talk first about the negotiation with yourself, because there's a key concept in there that we're going to use for the connector conversation. So when you sit down with a student or a client, someone you're coaching, what's the first question you ask? So just put in the chat, after the hi, how are you? What's the question that you ask someone to get started into understanding how you can be helpful to them? So just put it in the chat. This is not a test. All answers are fine. We just want to know, where do you start? Wonderful. Yeah, this is ideal. So as Tad and I suspected, you're orienting the early part of your conversation towards underlying needs, right? So none of you open your job coaching by saying, what position are you applying for, right? Because that's like way too far downstream. You're not looking for the question of, I already know this one thing. You're trying to get them to take a step back and say, okay, what do I want out of my conversation today? What would be most useful, right? As I come in today, what do I want to accomplish, right? These are all orienting questions towards what we in the negotiation world call interests, right? So interests are underlying needs, desires, objectives, whereas positions are, I have to be a yoga teacher at this studio, or I want to be an electrical engineer, or I'm going to work in food service. I want to start a restaurant, whatever. Like those are positions. They're static, they're firm. The interests are what underlie them, right? They're the way of getting people to, why does that matter? And there's a specific transition or reframe that Tad and I use all the time as we think about coaching, which is to try to move from the negative and the past to the positive and the future. So if you have a coaching client and they come in and you say, okay, let's just take this last question. What brings you today? What are you hoping to accomplish? And they say, I hate my job because my boss doesn't respect me. So great. What do they want though? Right. And so our work as coaches is to reframe to the positive and the future focus. So I might say, so what you want going forward, future focus, is to work at a place where you feel respected and where you're excited to go into work every day, right? Positive. That reorients our conversation towards trying to find that instead of getting stuck in the gripe. Tad, what have I missed on that?
Just some more examples. Like often what I do is I work for a micromanager and I can't handle it anymore. And usually that turns into, so it sounds like what you want is some autonomy and some trust.
Mm.
And so I'm taking a leap because I don't know that that's exactly what they mean, but I'm trying to find out what's going on. And I'm doing it by taking a stab at what I understand they do want. And believe me, they correct me if I'm wrong, but it gets a conversation going towards what they want instead of what they don't like.
And so with our coaching clients, we have a bunch of exercises that we do to try to uncover these interests. These are things we suspect you all have your own versions of. So we wanted to share a few in the chat, and please take them, borrow them, use them as your own. If you want to reach out to us, we'll share our contact information, and I'm sure Melissa will as well, to learn more about how they work. But these are some exercises for helping people move from positions, I hate my job, I hate being micromanaged, my boss doesn't respect me, to interests. I want autonomy. I want to work in a place where I feel respected, etc. Okay, so that's the core of the conversation with yourself. Once you're clear on what you want, your next role, once you have clarity, is to try to get access to the jobs that you want. And to do that, as Tad said, you need to work with connectors. So let's say that I am really interested in working in an organization like NCDA. Melissa would be an incredible connector for me because Melissa understands the landscape. She understands the people. She would be someone I would want to talk to. And so let's imagine that you have someone who's come to you and says, I want your help. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. I think I might want to be an electrical engineer. Who might you recommend that they talk to just to better understand? So who are the connectors you might send them to? So just put in the chat, who might you say, hey, have you thought about talking to fill in the blank to get more insight? So just go ahead and put in the chat, who are the connectors you might want to recommend that they speak with?
Is this specific to an electrical engineer, Justin?
Yes. Yeah, they want to be, but again, some connectors I would recommend you talk to no matter what you want to do. So, but yes, imagine that they say they want to be an electrical engineer. Who should they talk to understand more about that? What would you recommend? And categories here doesn't need to be like John, but rather, yeah, exactly. Someone from the engineering department. Love it. What else? Yep, great. One of the key things we often tell people around connectors is find the people who are already doing what you want to do and talk to them. Love it. Yes. Perhaps someone who's an alumna of one of their schools might be more likely to talk to them who is connected to that. Love that idea, right? So I could go on site somewhere. Yeah, great. So local engineering company, electrical engineering. Okay, fabulous. So you all are clearly getting this. We want to send people to a conversation with someone who understands the landscape of the place I want to enter. Now, here comes the fun part. They say, okay, Darren, that seems like great advice, but I'm terrified. Like, what am I just going to write to them and be like, hey, I need your help? Like, well, why would they meet with me? And so this gets to the part where this is a negotiation. The electrical engineering company in my local neighborhood isn't going to give me a job at this stage. I'm not qualified. I'm not applying for jobs. Like, that's not where we are in the job search process. I'm reaching out because I want to better understand the industry. But we're still negotiating. I'm negotiating to get your time in exchange for what, right? And so this is where we need to start thinking about the interests of connectors. What matters to a connector? What might make them want to talk to you? So now imagine yourself, or I guess be yourself, and someone reaches out to you to say, I want to learn more about career coaching, right? Or whatever specific social work, whatever your job is. I want to learn more about this. What would have to be true for you for that conversation to feel worthwhile, right? What might you get out of talking to a potential new member of your field? So just put it in the chat. What do you think? What might be the upside for you of having that conversation? Yes, great. So it could be that you're giving back. What else? Yeah. And not only are you identifying future talent, you're building connections with them, right? And so they may then be a resource for you. Good. Yeah, just being a good and helpful person, right? That in and of itself is valuable and worthwhile. Love it. Yeah, right. You could be building relationships with a future colleague. Tad, what else do you see?
Well, I just want to say that this is exactly the conversation, because so many of my clients, when I mention informational interviewing, they get that networking thing in their head and they're like, ugh, I don't want to do this. I'm like, all right, well, let's talk about exactly what Justin asked. And when we talk about, these are sort of, I call them the intrinsic interests that connectors have, feeling acknowledged, feeling valuable, feeling like they're helping someone, you know, what you've put in the chat. When my clients start to hear that just by asking for the informational interview, they're already meeting some of the needs that that connector has, it's starting to open the window for them to be more accepting of doing them. And asking for them, because they realize, and there's some extrinsic ones too, which we'll talk about, but just the fact that you ask for it really does something for people. They're suddenly they're acknowledged as an expert. That's pretty cool. Or someone cares about them. People love to talk about themselves, as you know. So, and love to give advice.
And importantly, we're all different. And so if for Kelly, having a feeling that you're connecting to perhaps a future colleague is really important, then I, as in the informational interview, I want to emphasize how committed I am to the field, how excited I am for future collaboration, how, you know, like things that speak to that interest. Whereas if the interest is what Darren said around wanting to feel like I'm giving back and helping, I want to be really grateful. You know, I want to be like, thank you so much for this time. You've been so helpful. And then I want to follow up afterwards and be like, I followed your advice and here's how it went. And it was really helpful. Thank you so much. Being able to understand the connector is hugely important. And so when you're working with career searchers, when you're working with clients and you're meeting a connector, so let's say with the example with me and Melissa's a big deal. I want this to be a important and useful informational interview. So I might actually start with someone less scary who I know better and say, what matters to Melissa? My whole informational interview is to understand Melissa. Melissa really cares about status, respect, formality, right? I'm not saying that's true, Melissa. I have no idea, right? But if that were the case, I show up in a suit, I show up 15 minutes early, I take notes in the meeting, right? But if Melissa really cares about friendship and collegiality and comfort, but her time is really tight, I might offer to walk Melissa home from a conference or back to her car and talk to her on the walk and just take frantic notes. And I show up in, you know, normal street clothes. Or maybe I with one of my connectors who had a very similar profile, I went to a basketball game of one of his teenage sons and we talked in the stands. But like that met his interests of collegiality and convenience because he had to go to the basketball game anyway and was happy to talk to me while his son played basketball. So that's what we want to start getting our clients thinking about as they go into these informational interviews. Okay, so I want to move to what happens in the interview itself. But Tad, anything to say more about identifying connector needs first?
Yeah, sometimes they give you a lot of clues in their LinkedIn profile or their online footprint. In interviews they do, or in podcasts that they give. When I was an early career coach, I really didn't know what outplacement was. And I was talking to a friend who'd been through outplacement. And he said, you know, if you're going to be a career coach, you really should know what outplacement is. Let me connect you to my old coach so you can do an informational interview, which I did. And going into it, I was like, how do I ask for this? I'm begging. All the same stuff came up for me. And I noticed in her LinkedIn profile that she was very interested in the overlap between coaching and mediation and conflict resolution. and I happen to have been a mediator. So in my invite to her, I mentioned our connection, and then also mentioned I'd love, this is what I'd love to find out more about outplacement. I'd love something 15 minutes of your time. And by the way, I noticed in your LinkedIn profile that you're interested in this overlap. I used to be a mediator. I'm a career coach now, so I'd love to talk to you about that. And that immediately, I got a response in like 5 minutes. Like, I'd love to talk about that. That'd be great. So I took the time to find out what was important to her in order to do that. It also turned out that one thing that was really important to her that I found out during it was handwritten communication. So what did I do? I wrote her a handwritten thank you note, which led her to sending me an email back saying, thanks so much for the handwritten email. And suddenly we had another touch point. So figuring out these interests and meeting them, it's amazing how strong it can be.
And so as you're coaching, this is one of the things we use a lot, is helping people think through the interests of the people they want to informational interview. And then we coach them through the conversation itself. So one of the things that happens a lot with our clients is some version of, why was the world built by extroverts for extroverts? I hate networking. I don't want to talk to people. This is so awful and cruel. And so finding a format that is small, focused, and manageable has been really important for us actually getting, we were talking about what's the advice you wish people would follow. One of them is actually have informational interviews. Tad and I talk about how the best informational interview is the one you actually have, because you can come up with a great list of people to interview and then not reach out to any of them because they're terrifying. So we've created this process for informational interviews to make it easier. And the process is basically this. It starts with, so I'm in my interview with Melissa. And my first question is to say, Melissa, I so admire your work. I've read about you before coming in. And I was wondering if you could just tell me your story. How did you get here? How did you end up, doing what you're doing now? That question serves two really important purposes. The first is it gives Melissa a chance to share things that I don't know, right? So I couldn't have even come up with a question about how Melissa got here, because there's so many intricacies of that I just don't even know in advance, that coming with a really prepared list, I'm going to miss things. So letting Melissa take me through the arc is way smarter, and then I can ask follow-up questions. The other is, in terms of interest, most people like being listened to. And so if we start the conversation with me listening, being interested, being attentive, I'm meeting a relational interest of Melissa's that's going to then make it much more likely she's going to want to help me in the second half of the conversation. So that's our first part. Please, would you tell me your story? Some version of that. The second part then is I want to ask the question, Melissa, if you were me, what would you do? Right? And this invites Melissa to take an empathy step, right? To imagine herself in my position and say, given what I know about the world and all the resources I have, if I were you, what would I try, right? Melissa's going to give me way, 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 way better advice than if I ask Melissa, could you give me advice? Because if you just say, could you give me advice, Melissa's going to give me advice without taking into consideration my situatedness. Whereas if I can get Melissa into my shoes and say, if you were me, what would you do? Melissa's going to give me way better advice. So in order to make that second step work, though, we need to be able to tell a story about ourselves. So here's a little worksheet that we use for helping people write their story. And it has a little biography. It has a little bit about what you're passionate about, what your interests are, your constraints, and then this ask. If you were me, what would you do? We're not going to go in great depth on this. We're sure you help people create something similar. But what we do want to talk about today is that last part, the question, if you were me, what would you do? We see two really common mistakes that people make. So in my interview with Melissa, I'll make both mistakes. The first mistake sounds something like this. I want to be an electrical engineer. No idea what to do. If you were me, what would you do? It's just like not specific enough. Like I don't know anything about you. I don't have context. Like, do you have training? Do you not have training? Do you have geographic constraints? Like, I know nothing. Like, so the problem's too big. The other mistake people make sounds something like, so I want to be an electrical engineer. I've applied for a bunch of programs. I've had several informational interviews. I'm planning on doing these training programs. And I've gotten an internship. If you were me, what would you do? Melissa says, sounds great. You sound like you're on top of it. So the other mistake is people And this makes sense from an ego perspective. People want to look like they have it together. So they present everything they've done without a clear problem for the connector to solve. And so it's really important that when you put forward an informational interview request, this question at the end, if you were me, what would you do? You have to be solving a specific problem. So what might some examples of those be? Tad, do you want to give us a couple to get us started? And then I'll ask for people to put them in the chat.
Sure. This gets to having a goal before you ask for an informational interview. You know, let's say, is it that you really are interested in the role that they're in? Let's say they're a logistics analyst and you really want to become a logistics analyst. Then your question would be, after you give your story, you'd say, well, you know, if you were me, what would you do to become a logistics analyst? But you've already told your story, so you're avoiding the problem of it being too big. Or it may be something broader, like, I want to get into high tech, but I've been in academia, so I don't know what that's like. You're in high tech. Can you, my question starting off the meeting would be, what drew you to high tech? What's it like? So to me, the way I'm interpreting your question, Justin, is have a goal when you go into the informational meeting, and both of your questions, what you ask them initially, as well as what advice you're asking for, are related to that goal. So and this is critical, is because then you really care about the answers. So you're not schmoozing, you're not doing what everybody thinks that, it's not the sales approach to networking. It's really genuine and you care about the answer. And so it's different than what they think what the client typically thinks it's going to be. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, exactly. And so as you think about what someone might get out of an informational interview, Tad named two already. One is to better understand a specific role, right? So you're in a specific role. Ivan, you work in social work in a hospital. I want to understand, what is it like to work in social work in a hospital? My gap is I don't understand. You do. If you were me and want to understand better, what would you do, right? So that's one. Another could be a whole sector, right? I want to understand better, working, as you said, in high tech, coming from academia. I'm just missing the whole landscape. Can you help me lay that out, right? So those are gaps I could have. What other gaps might your clients have that they could bring to a connector? So just put it in the chat. What else might someone be looking for that a connector could give them? Love it. So one could be you're changing, right, from one thing to another, and you don't know how to make the transition. Like, what do I need in order to change? Could be super helpful. Yes, love it. I have transferable skills and I have no idea how to talk about them. If you were me, Melissa, trying to think about talking about my transferable skills, how would you do it, right? Yes, great. So I want to get involved in professional organizations. I think that might be helpful. I don't know which ones. If you were me, which professional organizations would you look into, right? So you see how you're taking the need and then you're connecting it to them giving you advice from your point of view. So that's, yeah, Tad, go ahead.
So I also love the fact how nuanced this is getting, because this is exactly how rich connectors are. Because some of it is about, can I have information about the field? Other is, can I have information about how to position myself for the field? And then others is what's around the field, like the professional organizations, that might be helpful to me. So there's so many nuances, and all this means is you can't do it yourself. And this is how you collaborate in your job search.
And I just want to uplift this last one that went into the chat, that I don't find any passion in my job and I don't really know what to do about it. Like, that's a great example where that's a very meta question for a connector. And so making that question really work, I need to have told them a little bit about my interests. I really want to be living near my family in Boston. I'm really excited about doing work that relates in some way to animal welfare. I have no idea how to do that. I'm currently doing data analytics at a financial firm, and I don't find passion in my job. I really don't know what to do. If you were me, what would you do? And you see how adding that information about interest, all of a sudden, we all start being like, oh yeah, what would you? Maybe you could try this. Would you want to become a vet? What about working at a zoo? Like, you immediately can start thinking of ways to connect. Okay. We find through our work that when people have a chance to reflect on things they've learned, they are able to integrate them better. And so what Tad and I want to do is actually just give you another few minutes back in breakout rooms to just talk about two things, which are, how could you integrate some of what we've talked about today into your coaching? And then, do you have any questions for us? Anything you want to see us model as a coaches, or just questions in general? So we're going to give you, let's say, 7 minutes in breakouts to talk about that, and then come back and just answer any questions that come out in the last 5 minutes. So with that, the two questions are in the chat. How might you integrate any of this into your coaching? Because again, we hope you'll take anything you like from this and just use it. We're not attached to this is ours and you have to credit us and whatever. Like, if you like it, just use it. And then if you have any questions. So we'll give you 7 minutes to talk about that, and we'll see you back here. All right, welcome back all. So we have 5 minutes left. And our purpose, Tad and my purpose for this time, is just to give a chance to answer open questions. We've shared at lightning speed some of the content from our book, thinking about how collaborative negotiation and career development overlap, specifically focused on this component of informational interviews, which is a key part of everyone's career advice these days. And we bring this lens of what if it were a negotiation. So I want to open it up, and Tad has the first question for us.
While you're thinking of yours, Mai brought up one in our group that we didn't get a chance to answer fully, which was that people are passionate about the coursework they're doing, even if they're not doing that well in it, but they're just convinced that a job will come out of it. So they keep going with it. And Mai, I'm not sure if this is the way you meant it, but the way I interpreted that was that they haven't done the work to find out where that road leads. That if they do that, if they stay in that major and they go to that course study, how do they get a job? They think it's just going to happen. And that's what we work with our clients on, to say, before you fully engage, why don't you talk to some people who have taken that major and where it leads? So if that helps, I don't know if I got your question right.
Yes, it helps. Thank you.
All right, Kelly, am I saying that right?
Yes.
All right.
My question was about follow-up after individuals have the informational interviews. Like, do you have any recommendations for how to support them in following up, both as like a thank you and also to continue the relationship if that feels like, if that's mutually agreed upon? But like, how do you support them in doing that? How do you follow up with them to do that? Sorry, I thought it was better to ask it out loud than try to type it into the chat.
Absolutely. Great question. I have thoughts on this, Tad. I'm sure you do too. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So to me, when people are doing connecting, when they're working with connectors, they're bringing people into their search. So they're bringing people into their process. So after the thank you, the next reach out is to give them an update on their search and to tell them how the information that person shared has been helpful. Because people love that. Well, oh, that was helpful. I'm so glad. Again, it meets their interests. And it's another opportunity that whatever the person learned in the information interview that's important to that connector, it's another opportunity for them to meet that. Maybe it's because they've been to a conference that person is interested in, so they can share their notes. Or they've read an article, which I realize is cliche, but I love it when people send me articles. I love it when someone says, hey, did you see this, career coaching article in Forbes? I didn't know there was a career coaching article in Forbes. I love that. So anything like that to just, again, focus on those interests.
The other thing that Tad and I see a lot in our coaching is that just disorganization ends up being what really brings a lot of people down. And so one of the things that we often end up doing in our career coaching is helping people get organized, because how do you even remember to send the follow-up? Where do you put that? How do you, so that ends up being one thing as a coach that we say, if you're going to do informational interviews, you really want to follow up and say thank you. And we struggle to do this. I struggle to do that. If I don't have a system for saying, I put it on my calendar for the day I'm going to follow up, or what's my to-do list? How does that work? So that's one way we support people, is actually doing some organization coaching. The reason that is so important, other than just doing, actually having follow-up, is one of the main interests for a lot of connectors is not wasting their time. And so if I meet with Melissa, she gives me a ton of amazing advice and then never hears from me again, And then I reach back out and I'm like, hey, can we talk again? It's like, well, did you do any of the things I suggested? Whereas if I've done what Tad recommends and say, Melissa, thank you so much. I read the book you recommended. It was extremely helpful. I went to the conference. Here's what I learned. Then when I reach back, I'm like, Melissa, I'd like more advice. Melissa's thinking, this person does what I tell them to do. Like they might actually find the next conversation useful. So that ends up being another piece that is very helpful. Yeah. All right. I think we have maybe time for one quick question if anyone has one burning. All right. And then otherwise, Tad and I will put our contact information. Here's the link to the book again. We'll put our contact information in the chat if you want to reach out to us directly with questions or want to collaborate on something. And Tad, I put mine in. I assume you could do yours.
Yep.
Awesome. And then Melissa, just thank you so much for hosting us, and pass it to you if you have any final words.
Oh, thank you all so much. This has been wonderful. Everyone watch for the recording link. It will be available soon. And I will include all the links that were shared in the chat with that email as well. So thank you all for being here, and hopefully we'll see you on another webinar soon. Take care.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks,
Thank
Tad.
you all for coming. Thanks, Aaron.